All right.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين لله تبارك وتعالى. Finish with some brief points that I want. That is one generation, a group which consists of more than one generation, but a group of people. We're talking about the generation of the Salaf. Then the next after that is called Al-Khalaf, those who came after them. So you can look at the Khalaf from everyone after the first 300 years to our time, right? Those are the latter scholars. So in terms of the creed of the Salaf, they had two basic approaches to the attributes of Allah wa ta'ala. The most difference of opinion that we deal with when we talk about Ahl-Sunnah, which Imam An-Na'im mentioned, there are Al-Asha'ira, Wal-Maturidiyya, and in our time, there are more than one different faction of Islamic groups. The one that we are affected with the most in our surroundings are Al-Wahhabiyya. That is no doubt about that, right? So that's why they are mentioned specifically, right? Because the other groups, most of us don't follow them or are not influenced by them. So when we're talking about the Salaf, we're talking about two approaches, and I'm going to leave that, inshallah, till later, or Imam Na'im may mention it. One approach, and this is talking about the issue of the attributes of Allah, is to recite the verses and the hadith that came about the attributes of Allah as they were revealed, and clear Allah wa ta'ala from any resemblance to created things. That's one approach. So whenever you see an attribute of Allah wa ta'ala, you recite it as it is revealed in the Quran, or as the Prophet ﷺ mentioned it. You clear Allah from any resemblance to the created things, and you stop there. That's one approach. The other approach is an approach of figurative interpretation. In other words, you have something that is related as an attribute of Allah in the Quran or in the Hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, and that is given a figurative interpretation. These are two approaches. Both approaches are found among as-Salaf. And there is a book written by an Egyptian scholar that we're working on translating now that deals with this subject of the interpretations of the attributes of Allah in the Quran and the Sunnah by the Salaf. Right? And this is a very important point. Today, what you have today is people taking the attributes that are mentioned in the Quran and the Sunnah and applying literal, non-befitting meanings, right? This is an important aspect. And we have to take this stuff in stages, right? Because what is important, if you want to understand it, we should take it step by step, right? Because once you clarify one claim, then the claim that supports it is also proved invalid, right? So if the point is that the Salaf had the same approach as the modern day Wahhabiyya, who call themselves Salafiyya, then we shouldn't find among the Salaf the things that they say are unlawful, right? So they say, for instance, that no, we must literally believe that Allah's attributes are physical and real, but we don't know how. If that approach is valid, and that is the Salaf's approach, then we shouldn't find among the Salaf those who said opposite. You follow my point? It's very important to understand this. So once you establish those things, then it's easier to negate the false claim, right? It's very important to understand that. The last point I would mention, stop saying Salafi. Call the people by their name. Call them Wahhabi. Why do I say that? Because you're complicating the issue when you surrender that name to someone who it doesn't deserve. You're making the issue more hard. In other words, for instance, my name is Amin, but I am also Abu Aidarus, right? No one knows me as Abu Aidarus, right? Who's Aidarus? Right? No one knows that, right? So if you mention me by that name, what's going to happen? People are going to think I'm someone else, right? And depending what it's being used for, it can be very misleading, right? When you say Salafi, right, or Salafiyya, you're giving the false impression that these people are a Salaf. Many people, when they hear Salafi, they think that this is the Salaf. Too many of us. We don't distinguish between the two, right? And because of that, it gives a false authority, right? Because every Muslim wants to follow whom? The Salaf. So if you give a false impression that this is the way of the Salaf, and they're drumming that drum, and you don't, and you accept, that's going to be the default position. But if you call them by their name, whom they used to call themselves, and who the Muslims in their time knew them as, it'll be much easier to clarify the issue, right? I want to let's give an experiment. Y'all want to take an experiment test? Sure. Nobody said yes.
You know the answer, that's why.
What century did Mohammed ibn Abdul Wahhab live in? Does anyone know?
The
8th century. 12th, 13th century Hijri, right? That's Mohammed ibn Abdul Wahhab. What century we are now? 15th, Islamic century, 15th century. So that's about how many years ago? 200 and something years, right? Do we know any scholars in different parts of the world who lived at the same time as Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab?
No. Yeah. Yeah.
No, I said, do we know?
Oh, no.
I'm not saying, of course they are. So it says, do we know any? Okay, good. Who lived in that time? Uthman Dan Fodio, right? So that's in Africa. What about in Mecca, in Medina? Who were living in Mecca and Medina during that time?
Nobody.
There was stuff. Okay, that's a homework assignment. Remember I said no time and place? Remember I told you that one of the ways they give you false understandings is by making you have a broken chain. When you have a broken chain, what does that mean? You cannot name whom? You can't name your men. That's why you don't know who's in between. So they'll tell you the great scholars of Islam were whom? Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. Before him, who you know? Come on, be honest. Ibn Taymiyyah. You only know the people they told you. What is the distance between Ibn Taymiyyah and Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahab? How many years? 400 or 500 years, right? More. You're talking about 7th, 8th century. So you're talking about 12th, 13th century, almost 500, 600 years, right? Where's all the scholars in between these people? Where's the connected chain? And when you discover that, you're going to discover not only individuals, but what they believed, more importantly, right? I'll give you an easy assignment.
Was his brother a scholar? He just went to book.
His brother was a scholar too, Suleiman, right? So you want to look around that time, right? So we're talking about the 12th century, 13th century, right? End of the 12th century, late 1100s, all the way up to 1200 and something, 13th century, right? This is that span of the Wahhabi movement when it's developing, right? Learn about the scholars in different places in the world, right? And who were the famous scholars and what was their belief? It's very important. And especially in Mecca and Medina, because now we know Mecca and Medina is the centers, right? This is a homework assignment for next time we come. So I want you to think, you got the whole Islamic world, right? You have Africa, you have the subcontinent, India, Pakistan, you have Russia, you have Iraq, you have Egypt, you have Yemen, you have Syria, Palestine, Lebanon. You have scholars all over the world, right? Start to gather, do some research. We got Google, so this is I give you permission to use Google. You just want to start gathering, right? In this way, you want to get those scholars, you want to know about them, and you want to know what was their creed. You're going to discover something amazing when you do that. And I'll start. Where is it?
The brother Joe Kareem is trying to get him.
And there were many, many famous scholars, great scholars, all in those lands who were particularly scholars of Hadith, Hufaz. They were those who memorized over 100,000 Hadith with their chains of narration. Mohammed ibn Abdul Wahab was not like that, right? At all, not even close. This is an important assignment, right? We said we're going to start studying, right? So get to know your neighbors. You can do group research, right? So we're going to work together on it. Everyone, and if you can, find out in different places, right? And don't worry, I'm going to help you with the assignment. As you do your part, I'm going to help you with the research, right? So we agree to this research?
Yes, Google stuff. You know, a lot of people they want to go on Google, so you don't want to learn that way, right?
No. I just want you to go search for names. That's it. And just come up with what you got. I'm going to help you with that one.
GC relies on the travel.
Right? Or cheat sheet, like you said, reliance of the traveler. I'm not saying you're going to go, but I want you to just learn the research. And Google can help you. You're going to check that research with what? Living teachers, right? So you're going to bring your research, we're going to look at it. And whereas there's things we're going to help you with. But I want you to do, because if I tell you to go get the books, you can't, right? That's impossible for most of us, right? Because we don't have the books, which is a problem, which will develop over time. But you do have your computer, and you can research. And then once you research, we're going to go over that research. But you're going to appreciate it in the long run. But so to his question, Google is not a shaker. But it is a source that you can get some information, right? That's just to help you go get the names. The research part, after you get the names and you get some idea, I'm going to help you with. Inshallah. Go ahead. me say it to you this way. Hold up, let me make sure. What is our homework assignment?
Find some names of the scholars of the past.
Not of the past.
During the time of Ibn Wahab.
So I gave you a specific time zone, time span. When,
11 to 14.
come on, y'all help me out. Just say, you know what I mean, we wasn't planning on doing the research. I gave a span of time. Come on, help me out.
From the 8th century to the 12th.
That's not what I
You
said.
said during Muhammad Abdul Wahab.
And then I gave you the span. 12th to the 13th century, right? So when we say 12th, you can start from 1150 to 1399. You want to get the area. I mean 1299. From 1150 AH to 1299, just to give you an area, right? So those scholars need to live within that span of time, all around the world.
1299.
Hijri calendar.
I'm going to show you something, but you have to do some work. It will help you. Trust me. If you have the book Reliance of the Traveler, who has that book? I suggest every one of you have the book. Why? Because in there, in the back, there's a bibliographical bibliography section, which is going to give you a bunch of scholars, right? But and then it'll tell you the dates they died. You can go there, for instance, and get an idea. Oh, you can get the book, Reliance of the Traveler, from our website, Masjid Mohammed, or mmacbooks.com. The book is available there. .com. And there's the section X, is all biographies.
There's no
Right? But listen, what we want to develop is important in our communities, that we don't develop just parents, right? I want you to actually know what you're talking about, that you actually did some work. We got to go from learning to actually driving, right? And when you start, sometimes you have training wheels, right? When you start to ride the bike, right? This is just training wheels. One day, we should be at the point as a community where we can actually research, right? We're not there yet, right? We should actually know original sources and how to research. But it takes time, so we're going to take step by step. I know people that's been studying Ahl Sunnah for 20 and 30 years, and they don't know how to research yet. 20, 30 years, and they don't know how to research because someone never taught them. I'm Sunni, I'm Ahl Sunnah, but cannot research. If you put them in a library, forget about it, right? We can't allow that to continue. We have to teach us how to learn, right? It's extremely important. So be patient with the process, especially if we're looking for succeeding generations, right? You want a day where you're not slaves of others. You want a day when you're free people for real. You want to see that day. Even if you yourself remain in captivity, do the work to free your children or your grandchildren. And what I mean by captivity, you know what I mean, right? Mental, religious captivity. Right? Go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Bismillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulihi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in wa man tabi'ahum bi ihsani ila yawm ad-din wa la hawla wa la quwwata illa billahi al-'aliyyil 'azim. How's everyone doing this afternoon? Alhamdulillah. We thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this opportunity, and we thank you all for coming. I got a confession to start off with. You know, if y'all watch our show sometimes? Okay, I think so, because when I came in, somebody was like, Imam with a boom bat. That's not my name. I assume that you guys watch the show. Well, a confession is that I didn't really come prepared today to do a talk. I thought I was going to be in the audience. So you can tell by the way I'm dressed. You know, usually I try to be like Imam Malik, rahimahullah, with narrated knowledge about the Prophet of Islam, where I best dressed. You know,
Imam who?
Imam Malik.
Oh, Imam Malik.
I love Imam Malik.
Allahu Akbar.
You know, that's why we memorize the Mecca, you know, 9 days. You know? So I put on my b-boy gear today, you know, I'm relaxing. You know, this is stuff, you know, we in time, you know, we'd be stuck in our time zones, right? So this is the stuff we used to wear in '87, you know, and now I'm lived long enough to see it turn around. You know, they got Afterpay now, so you can pay this in installments. But '87, they charge us $300 to put a name on it. This used to be Christian Dior, for those who know fashion, and Pierre Cardin, you know, right? They charge us an arm and a leg, and now I get it for like $60. So alhamdulillah, I'm grateful. So, you know, but we came today, inshallah, and the topic is Aqeedah, and you know, we always discuss it in detail because it's very important. And with respect to Aqeedah, you know, there's a magic bullet when we talk about Aqeedah, and it's in a phrase called Fard Ayn. A phrase called Fard Ayn. And many of us, you know, and like Imam Naeem was mentioning, we're talking to the choir. But when we really are proficient in our Fard Ayn, that really takes us a long way. You know, because when we learn the Fard Ayn, we learn in basic Aqeedah books what is Yajibu ala kulli mukallaf, right? What is obligatory upon each accountable person. And I'm not going to bother you about who the accountable person is, but I mean, you all know who's accountable, right? For mukallaf. Okay. So also, when a person becomes mukallaf and they're responsible, there's a certain age, you know, they're young, you know, so some of the stuff that we're talking about with Aqeedah and like the rulings of Ramadan and our prayers and Tahara, we're supposed to know this at a young age, you know, and many of us, we may have been deprived as whether we were reverts to Islam or, you know, we just missed traditional knowledge for a good part of our lives, you know, whatever the case is. This is our magic bullet now to know what is necessary to know as far as Aqeedah. You know, what is wajib for the person who is mukallaf to know about Allah? What is mustahil? What is impossible for Allah? And what is yajuz? What is possible? You know, and these things we supposed to know in detail. There was a question this morning. Did any of you watch Imam Amin's program in the morning called Scattered Thoughts? Anybody?
Yes.
Okay.
Let me see those hands.
Yeah, it's not about. But I suggest you try to watch it if you can. And I always joke with Imam Amin about this, but he says it's scattered thoughts, and I'm like, ain't no way these thoughts are scattered. You put this together, man. Like you didn't just wake up and start talking, you know. So there was a person on there this morning, and he asked a question when we talked about the Wahhabis, and the question that was posed was, okay, you know, the Wahhabis, or they say Salafis, the Wahhabis say that they, you know, get their proofs from the Quran and Sunnah, and the Ash'aris get their proof from Quran and Sunnah. So, you know, how do we know who's right? You know, and so this ties into the topic that we're talking about today, is that we have to know our chains of narration, you know, because the Wahhabis, you know, they're what one of my teachers called their page turners. And what he meant by page turners is that they just take their proofs from books and they extract certain things and they, you know, they copy and paste and they select what they want you to know. And a lot of stuff that they pass off, that they leave out. And, you know, subhanAllah, they have been allowed to do this methodology since this minhaj of theirs has been taken off in America, and particularly here in Philly. Particularly here in Philly, because you guys are tested with the worst kind of Salafis. You know, because there's not just one kind, you know. There's a book that I suggest all of you should read and get some insight. There's a book that's called Counterfeit Salafis. It's called The Counterfeit Salafis. And it's by a brother named, his name is Tariq Abdul Halim. Now, I don't know if he's a Wahhabi or not, but he gives categorizations like Imam Amin mentioned about the different kind of the Wahhabis, or they say Salafis.
What's the name again?
It's called the counterfeit Salafis, right? And you can that's an easy search. I know y'all got homework assignment. I don't want to bombard y'all, but that's an easy search. You can do that while you listen to me.
What's the author's name again?
His name is Tariq Abdul Halim. Now I'm not promoting the author or nothing like that, but it's a good book. But it's telling you about the different categories of Salafis, the counterfeit, the jihadists, the academics, and the ones who are just like really out of pocket. And it's something for people in Philly to know, because the ones that's really out of pocket are concentrated in your city. Of Nabawiya and all of these other masjids that opened up in opposition to masjids that were already open, which is contrary to what the Salaf practice. Because when you learn about the issues of fiqh, if there's a masjid in your area, you're not supposed to open up a masjid if the masjid is, doesn't have a lot of numbers. You're supposed to keep your support there. You don't open up another masjid because, you assume that these people are from bid'ah, like they say, and they use propaganda to say that people are misguided, when the people who are on the truth are the ones that they're attacking, So they open up these masjids, and some, they get a lot of numbers, and it's really a smack in the face to the tradition of Ahl Sunnah in the city, because you have a long tradition of people who've been here teaching the traditional Islam, and then these people were allowed to come in and seemingly they have a voice. But you all, like we're saying, we're speaking to the choir, but you should know their methodology, and their methodology is to turn pages, to take what they want from books, even taken from traditional books, but they don't have this isnad, because we call them Wahhabis, but another name they should be known by is the Taymiyyun, followers of Ibn Taymiyyah. Because if you ever talk to any of those Wahhabis, they will never undermine Ibn Taymiyyah. They'll say great scholars like Imam Nawawi and Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani and other great ulama, they'll say, okay, they were wrong in Aqeedah, but we take from them. And then they have their own, ulama who have blunders in Aqeedah. Some of them reach kufr. That's a fact. And they will say, no, he just made a mistake. The Prophet Islam said that the scholar who tries hard, he gets 2 rewards. No, blunders, deliberate blunders. And you all know some of that history. And you had another homework assignment is that you could check some of the ulama who lived during the time of Ibn Taymiyyah, which is 8th century Hijri, and some of those who refuted them. Because you all heard that glossy, romanticized story that, that the scholars during this time were jealous of him, so they put him in jail. No, they G-checked him. Like, yo, boy, you talking out the side of your neck. If you don't fix it, man, it's going to be a problem. I'm just saying the words that we can relate to, because I'm not a scholar. They use scholarly, but they said some other, when ulama were telling the truth, sometimes they use harsh words, so you know where they're coming from. So they put him in jail and stuff like that. And then you see some of these exact mannerisms from these Wahhabis. When you approach them, oh, no, that's not what I meant. Oh, that wasn't what I meant. No, that's what you said. You had to mean it. You implied it somehow, and then they'll talk behind your back. And then when you approach them, when you step to them, it's a whole different program. But these madkhalis, they're called madkhalis in your city. They're like, I don't know if there's any European brothers here or not, but they're like the Irish of the Salafis. So like the low part, and don't take that personal, because we in a sensitive time. Everybody get canceled at the next statement. But they're like the worst kind of Salafis. If you look in that book that we mentioned, they're like the worst kind. But they are deep in your city, and they're deep in my city. Matter of fact, in Camden, one of the masjids, the Wahhabi masjid, is named Mohammed ibn Abdul Wahhab. Now, locally, we call it by the street that it's on. We say, oh, Spruce Street. Nobody, but we have a joke like, nobody's saying all that in a sentence. They're like, what, Masjid Muhammad, you don't say, Spruce Street, yeah. That's not what we go to, so. But that's the name of the masjid, So, and these masjids, they call, over here, you got Ben Baz, you got Mukbil. They name them after the personalities that they love. And all of these personalities are Wahhabis who have no chain of narration that goes back to the Salaf Salih that they claim to follow better than anyone else. You know? And so that's something we always discuss this, because we gotta, you know, really revamp this thing and try, you know, and it's important because sometimes we use a method where we're having dialogue with them. It might turn to a debate, it might turn to an argument. And sometimes, you know, the kind of people we are, we rough and tough, we confrontational, it can turn to something else. And in a town like Philly, I ain't even gotta say it. I ain't even gotta say it. But the approach that should be is that these magic bullets that we're talking about is that our people know their far iron. Because when you know your far iron, you're better than a lot of those Salafis or Wahhabis, right? You know why? Because a lot of them, because I used to run with them, I used to be a part of their, like, something similar to what Imam Naim was mentioning when he talked. And then when I went back and started learning traditional Islam, I started learning about these people. They didn't even know when Ramadan enters, you know. They don't know how to identify the moon. You know, some of them don't know that the woman has to make ghusl after she finishes her menses. And these are things that are wajib upon the person who's mukallaf. And you got people, you know, I've seen it with my own eyes, people who thinking that they can still eat suhoor when the orange glow is in the sky, because you don't see the actual sun. But if you ask them about Sheikh so-and-so and the minhaj and the do not take from list, oh man, they ain't even got to do a Google search. They can run it off the top of their head, you know. But you ask them what is Fard and Sunnah in your wudu, they can't tell you. You know, so Fard Ayn is very important, you know. And when we learn in Aqeedah, it's very, very important for us to not just know, but to digest this stuff and actualize it, because that's the weapon that you have against, you know. And going back to that brother's question, you know, because sometimes some of us, we listen to these people and we're intrigued because they're reciting Quran, they know Arabic, they're reciting Hadith. But, you know, when you go further than that, they don't have any Isnam. And the furthest that it could go, really, is to Ibn Taymiyyah, who was what century? 8th century Hijri, you know. And the time of the Salaf is understood to be at least 300 years after the Hijra. And some extended just a little bit beyond to include some of the great ulama who came right outside those 3 centuries, like Imam Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari and others, right? So there's still, between that time and Ibn Taymiyyah's time, as we mentioned, 400-something years. Then from Ibn Taymiyyah to Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab is another 500 years. So in between all of that, those gaps are missing. And these are ulama that they won't even mention, that they know, if they're honest, that these are the ulama who carry this deen all over the world. You know, and they give you pieces of it, you know. And then you'll see some of the books that they butchered, some of the Ahl Sunnah books. Like you'll go to, what's the name of that bookstore? The one you always buy those shiny books from?
Manar?
I don't know. It's not where they got the shiny.
It's not
Dar Salam. You spot it. Yeah, you spot it.
New York.
Okay. So you go there and you see all these shiny books, and then you'll read a book. You'll see Imam Tahawi's book, Aqeedah Tahawi, right? And then you'll see them butchering that text, you know. And Imam Naim mentioned this in one of our discourses. You know how they put their commentary, and it's not based on traditional commentaries of that book, you know. And if you notice, you know, whenever they like particular that text, they'll say you have to read it with what's the sheikh's name that they mentioned on Aqeedah Tahawi? No, no, it's Ibn Abul Is. Yes, Hanafi. They say you got to read it with this one. Now you know there's about 15 commentaries, major commentaries on Imam Tahawi's book. And then when they say that one, then they say, okay, you got to read it with the explanation of Fawzan, you know. So you got to look for these tricky words, because sometimes we think that it's just, okay, why can't we all get along? We Muslim and they Muslim, you know, they quoting Quran and Sunnah, we're quoting Quran and Sunnah. No, you know, because a proof and evidence is only as good as one's understanding of it, you know. So quoting Quran and Sunnah and picking and choosing what you want people to know or what you don't want them to know means nothing. How is the understanding coming from that time of the Salaf al-Salih? And when that understanding comes from the Salaf al-Salih, there's a continuous chain in each generation. That somebody took it from so-and-so to so-and-so to so-and-so to so-and-so that reaches all the way back up to that time, you know? And that's the thing that they're missing, you know? And then some of them, when they try to be a little savvy, they'll mention some of their, you know, they got great sheikhs, and, you know, some of them, they say, these are the big three, you know? These are the big three sheikhs of contemporary time, like no other scholars is around, you know? And they give them titles that this person was the Muhaddith of Yemen. And real muhaddithin in Yemen are laughing. Like, are you serious? Or this person is the greatest mufti of contemporary times. And real muftis are laughing, you know. But a lot of us don't know who those real muftis are sometimes. And we've allowed these people to penetrate our communities, and we're mixing in, you know. And I can tell you, one of the sad things being on the ground is that you get a Muslim and you're teaching them that far line, teaching them what's obligatory for them to know, and then one of these Wahhabis get them, man. And it turns into something else. The next thing you know, they're warning against you, they don't give you salams, you know, and all that, and then, okay, well, okay, brother, let me hear that Fatiha again. And they still don't have it. But they know all of what masjid don't go to and all this stuff. And all of that stuff is cult-like behavior, you know. And that's how you know that it is a splendid group from Ahl Sunnah, and that's why we can't recognize them as such, and that's why we don't call them Ahl Sunnah. They're Wahhabis. It's a splendid group. It's a cult group, and we shouldn't be ashamed to say it. But we need to know why. When we encounter these people, we need to be able to explain why they are like that. Why, knowing the history of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, and knowing the fallacy that they promote. You know, you read their books and they say that he says in his own biography, or well, someone said in his biography that, you know, during his time when he started propagating his da'wah, that people were worshiping, they were polytheists. They were worshiping trees and stones. Now, you all know the time that he lived in, right? He's during his time was some 800 years after the time of the Salaf. So how is it that the Muslims already knew Tawheed from the time of the Prophet ﷺ? That was, the idols were done. 800 years later, they come in and now they're going back to worshiping stones. Like, that doesn't make any sense. But this is what people tell you when they categorize that Tawheed, because they say that in Tawheed al-Rububiyyah, the Muslims are the same as the pagan Arabs and Christians. That we believe the same, they just worship different. That's what they say. So they saying that you saying La ilaha illallah and affirming Allah's oneness and his uniqueness. They're saying that the Christian, who's when they say they believe in God, but he's one in three, they're saying that you're the same in that sense. They just went wrong astray in worship, you know. And then they use that to attack people for a genuine tradition in Islam, you know, stuff like tabarak and, you know, tawassul. That's what they use to attack, and they use that same methodology. That's how they come and saying, and changing the concept of what worship is, and changing the concept of what shirk is, you know, this kind of thing. So, you know, we have to be on the lookout for it, because it's prominent in Philadelphia. It's prominent in Philadelphia, and many people who are coming into Islam are coming across these people, and they're telling them this stuff, that, you know, not the categorization of Tawheed, but saying you have to believe in it like this. And if you don't believe it like this, then you don't understand La ilaha illallah. And according to us as Ahl Sunnah, La ilaha illallah is the basic testification to enter into Islam. Because when a person is mukallaf, is, you know, when they are adult, they are sane, and the message, the basic message of Islam has reached them. And the basic message is the utterance of La ilaha illallah. And no Muslim understands La ilaha illallah except no God except God Almighty. No God except God Almighty. They tell you can't even translate it like that. They said the one, or however they translate it, I can't even, because we start going off on a tangent. But they tell you can't even translate that as no God but Allah, because that's what you mean when you enter the Shahada, that there is no supreme being, no deity, nothing, except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Almighty. You already, that's the ultimate expression of Tawheed when you say La ilaha illallah. And they tell you that's not enough. They tell you that's not enough. And it's almost, they imply that your Islam is invalid if you don't understand Tawheed the way they categorize it, So that's a whole other class that we might discuss, but just be aware that the magic bullet for us is knowing our far line, being able to articulate it, and be able to counter these people when we come across them, because that's how we will offset some of this stuff, because that movement is dying down, just like with all cults, they have a burst, they get a good following, they reach a peak, then they end up fighting with each other, then they disown each other, and then when the leader dies, then they're scrambling to see who's going to be the next leader. Then the one who's the leader wasn't supposed to be the real leader, so someone else breaks off with another group. And that's how cults keep going. And then, somebody be built for that stuff. Because you listen, the only logical solution you can come to why people still follow that Wahhabi doctrine is that somebody's built for it. Somebody got to follow it because somebody's doing it. Because you be thinking, like, how these people believe in this stuff? How are these people listening to this stuff and it's not even making any sense logically? Somebody got to do it. We just got to thank Allah that it's not us. Thank Allah that it's not us. But also making sure that we take time to reach people who show some type of potential. Because in my experience in dealing with those Wahhabis, you have some, they're just cold Wahhabis. They ain't going to budge. You got some who are on the fence, and then you got some who don't really know and they're open for knowledge. We have to learn how to identify those and make sure that we reach them and be patient with them and try to help them retrain themselves, because it's very important that, Muslims know what is obligatory on them. And a lot of those people, they are missing. They don't even know the basics, even though if you come across them, they sound like they're knowledgeable. They got a few hadiths that they got on deck, they're ready to, bust in your head with. They got scholarly references according to what they say as scholars, and for a person who don't really know, it sounds good. It sounds good, Well, he said the Quran, he was Arabic, it gotta be. He went to Medina. Medina is the city of the Prophet Islam. That's how we be trying to make sense of this stuff. And the person that hasn't learned their obligation, that's how they get them. Well, he got, he wear these nice clothes on, online, and he looks clean. He don't look like he lying. The nigga lying. Excuse me for saying that word. We don't that word social. But yeah, they lying, man. And it's a lot of it be delivery. And then a lot of it is just they don't even want to accept the truth. Because one of the things with this brother asked the question, I'm going to end here, is that why don't we find out what the truth is? Why? Because they never want to discuss it. Because that means they have to explore the Salaf from that time up until now with that chain, and they don't have it. They got to keep copying and pasting. They got to keep, it's just like in a rap game. If you want to go platinum, you got to go after the hottest artists out, and you got to defame them. So you gotta be a 50 Cent, as Ja Rule or somebody, so you can be a. Because that way people won't pay attention that you ain't really hot. That's how the game goes. I hope everybody knows what I'm talking about. But I know some of the older folks like, man, what's he talking about? Well, we live in an age, the older, the younger generation, we all doing the same thing, right? He said, no, thank you, brother. That's what I wanted to hear. Absolutely not. Yeah, so you got to defame people. So that's how they keep their followers, by keep attacking Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And our approach should be, one of the approaches is make sure that we teach. Because the far iron, all of us from, our 9-year-old daughters, our 15-year-old sons, they should be able to teach the knowledge that we're talking about here in general. And then that's what we have to do, get everybody conditioned to be able to articulate what the far iron is, because that is a wealth of knowledge. And many of you, if you completed basic books on Aqeedah, basic books of faith, you have a lot already. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to keep us firm on His way and to give us the ability to disseminate this knowledge and make it beneficial for the people that we come across. So I'll stop there.
Are there
Are there any questions?
All questions are directed to Imam Otis.
Genius. No questions?
Gotta be some questions.
Gotta be some questions.
You know, there's an opposite. If you don't ask questions, you get asked questions.
Yeah.
Right? Go ahead.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
One thing you should know, they should know too, that you know the obligation, you speak about the obligation now to the religion.
Say it again, I'm sorry.
You was, in your speech, you were saying that you have to let them know, you have to know, the obligation.
Yes.
So I'm asking you were speaking about, you must learn the obligation knowledge of the religion.
Right. Where's the question though?
That was the question.
I'm just messing with you,
What
man.
is an obligation, but you didn't full obligation about what?
Let me ask a question, since no one has questions. I have some questions, right?
Yeah, you didn't justify, you said obligation.
Oh, no, because that's the whole class. We were just saying, like, we should all know what our part ayn is, and we should be able to express it. Now, going over the part ayn, that's a whole nother, that's what we're doing online and our, private, masters, So no questions at all?
Okay, let me ask you a question. So I have a question. Just by show of hands, not a test. I'm just trying to realistically know who we're talking to and what is needed related to the people we're talking to. How many of you have studied a book in the basics of the religion, a complete book from cover to cover with a teacher? Raise your hands. Raise. I'll repeat the question. How many of you have studied a book of the basic Islamic knowledge, a complete book from cover to cover with a teacher? Let me see. How many of you have memorized the complete book with a teacher? So one? Okay, so just one. How many have studied 3 books, different books in Islamic knowledge completely with a teacher and finished? The reason why I'm asking that is that way, they say we're talking to the choir. You don't want to talk to the choir. You want to know what we're doing. So one of the things what I'm discovering is that we need to start putting our Islamic knowledge in some kind of structure, right? So we should study Islam in terms of sciences, right? And this way it would help us to cover the information. So if we're going to study first a general book, right? And it could be any text that serves it, that covers that obligatory knowledge or that fard ayn knowledge in general. Then we should have studies in specific sciences, like a book in Aqeedah, a book in al-fiqh, a book in at-tasawwuf, right? This is the way you understand sciences, and it'll make it easier for you to understand the subjects, right? It'll make it much easier. So, inshallah, what we want to do is the next time we come, we'll have a general talk, but we also want to start studying a book, right? I think we do you an injustice by giving you just lectures. It's scattered. Even though these things are important, we need this, what Imam Fahim mentioned. And that way, we're ensuring that you're learning in a structured way that you compare it with other things, right? I think that would be a good idea. What do you think?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead. We're going to have a test on all this stuff that we covered today before we leave. So make sure you study real quick.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, rabbil alameen, wa afdalu salatu wa tamu taslim. Ala sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Wa radiyallahu ta'ala an sadat al-tabi'in wa ulama al-amilin wa a'immat al-arbat al-mujtahidin wa muqarribin ila yawm al-din. Amma ba'd. Alhamdulillah, I was jotting down some things while Imam Fahim was talking. And I sort of want to add that to what I planned on saying in this section. And I want to pick back up on, I want to look at it from, my personal journey, because all of us, we have our own story, our own individual journey of how we evolved, or how we grew in knowledge, or how we got to where we are at now. And for me, as I said, if you would have came to me in the 90s, right, for most of the 90s, I was what we refer to as a default Wahhabi. I was a Wahhabi not knowing I was a Wahhabi, while at the same time thinking I'm against the Wahhabis, right? And for me, what opened it up for me, and of course I didn't know it at the time, but I was halfway consciously, halfway subconsciously searching for something. And after the fact, I narrowed it down to about 3 things. I mean, it wasn't at the time all organized in my head like it is now, but when I think back on it, this is what I was looking for. I was looking for an African connection. I was looking for the Maliki school. And I was looking for a Jama'ah community, Islamic community. Because, I'm a history buff. And when I'm reading about the history, the Islamic history, what I'm seeing in the books, what I was seeing in the books is not what I was seeing around me. Like, okay, we're Muslim, we're praying. At the time I'm living in New York City, my hometown, right? So I'm like, something's missing. You know how you're eating a plate of food, it may look good, but something's off, something's missing. It ain't sticking to my ribs, right? it ain't right, something's off.
Chinese food.
Say it again?
I feel like Chinese food.
Like Chinese food, yeah. Yeah, subhanAllah. Yeah. And so, in my mind, I said, I want to look for these things. And so, one of the things that I was actively pursuing was trying to find Maliki books, Maliki teachers. And anybody here follow the Maliki school of thought? Raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we ain't Shafis in the building.
Shafis in the building.
Gang. If you go back to that time, the only online resources you had at that time was Aisha Bewley's website. Anybody familiar with Aisha Bewley? Yeah. And on there you had the translation of the Risala of Ibn Abi Zayd, translation of a few of Sheikh Uthman Ben Fodil's books, and other online resources. And one thing that did it for me, because I'm openly looking, right? I'm looking for Ahlul Sunnah resources. I'm just, whatever I stumble upon, I'm getting it. So one of the weirdest places, Dar es Salaam Books on Atlantic Avenue, Dar es Salaam Publishers, that's like, Wahhabi 101, right? But in that bookstore, sometimes way in the corner somewhere where ain't nobody really looking, you might find some jewels. And there I found Imam Shafi, an English translation of Imam Shafi's Risala. At the time, I didn't know what it was. Imam Shafi, something get it. I just got it. And I found the Risala of Ibn Abi Zayd al-Qayrawani, which is a basic, lower, middle level Maliki fiqh text. But one of the open secrets about that book is that it's not only a fiqh book. And so, the one I found is English and Arabic. And, the English is trash. Dara Fiqh publication, they're notorious. Sometimes their translation is opposite of what it means, literally. Subhanallah, right? But the Arabic is clear, fully voweled, loved it. And so, I got me a Maliki book. So I had the Arabic, English translation from Aisha Bilali's website, because you can't use Dark Fiqh's English translation. Trash, right? So I began to dig into it, look into it, and I'm reading it. And after the introduction, it's talking about Aqeedah. The Risala of Ibn Abi Zayd, the Aqeedah section, can be a standalone Aqeedah book by itself. And it just started hitting me. I'm reading it. It don't say nothing about Tawheed, Rububiyyah, Tawheed al-Asma wa Sifat, Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah, don't have none of that. And this is one of the points I want to make. When you go to the books of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, at least in a topic or subject of Aqeedah, you're going to see the breakdown, the way it's organized is completely different. The first thing you're going to see is wording or phrasing like Imam Fahim mentioned. It is obligatory upon every mukallaf or responsible person to know. And then everything that you're going to be told first has to relate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what we call ilahiyat. In other words, related to Allah himself. And then usually, after talking about what's the bare minimum or what's the proper belief with regards to Allah, is going to be some discussion on how or what is the proper belief with regards to the prophets and messengers. And this is called Nabawiyat. And then usually after that, there's some discussion on what we have to believe or what's the bare minimum or proper belief with regards to those things of the unseen, the afterlife, the life in the grave, all of those things. And these things are called sam'iyat. It comes from that title comes from the word sama'a, which means he heard or to hear. And the reason why it has that name or that title is because these are things that none of us have experienced. We don't know ourselves. We heard about them from the prophets and messengers. Even if they're these things are mentioned in the Quran comes to us by means of Prophet Mohammed sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So you're going to notice that the organization is completely different. And then if the book is just dealing with the fard ayn, the individual obligations with regards to Aqeedah, the bare minimum, is going to stop there. But if it's getting to some other issues, it may mention some other issues after that. So this is what I saw in the Risala of Ibn Abi Zayd al-Qayrawani, even before I had a teacher or anything like that. And like I mentioned, I was looking for an African connection. Because I remember I used to always look at those atlas books. And usually how they color code the maps when they go through the time period, like they say in the beginning, like during the first generation, meaning like during the time of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, you'll see Arabia in green, right? And then when it gets to the time of the rightly guided caliphs, the green gets a little bigger, right? It's in Persia and Sham and stuff, right? And then it just keeps, then it gets bigger. Now it's North Africa, including in all of that. Then it's bigger. You see some green over there in Asia, right? And then after it gets to, you know, past the 13th century, is just usually people kind of like skate over the history. And then, you know, it gets to the modern age. Then you see all this green in Africa. You say, wait a minute. Green, and you look at the little, what you call it thing, not the scale, map, the legend on the map. And you say green equals Islam. You see all this green in Africa, but no discussion, no paragraphs, no chapters on how it got green. Right? And so that made me curious, like, well, okay, we know how it got green over there and how it got green over there. Why we don't know how it got green in Africa? So, well, alhamdulillah, subhanallah, I begin to learn about different people who were enslaved and, you know, brought here, our slaves, some of our forefathers and ancestors. One of them who stands out to me was one named Bilali Mohammed. Bilali Mohammed, he was from West Africa. I believe he was from Futu Toro. He was Fulani. I forgot exactly where he's from. Futu Toro was a portion of modern day Senegal. But he came to what we know as the United States through the Bahamas. And he was enslaved on the Sopelo Island of Georgia, off the coast of Georgia. You know, they got a whole bunch of sea islands that run along the Carolinas and Georgia. Sopelo Island is one of them. And he was actually an overseer. And he actually had a Jamaat, like literally as a slave. And during the War of 1812, which is part of the Revolutionary War, you know, the Americans fighting to get away from their, you know, former colonizers, the British. You know, he's even reported his slave master literally gave him some muskets to help defend the island from the British. Because see, there's a lot of politics involved. See, the British, when they were fighting the Americans, even though original Americans were British, but you understand, right? I guess you gotta be clear. They tried to get a lot of slaves to revolt, and they promised slaves their freedom if they would side with the British. For whatever reason, Mohammed Bilali didn't do that, and he kind of like defended the island against the British, but there's not really reports that the island was even attacked. But he's reported to have said that I can answer for the Africans of the true faith, but I'm not responsible for these not my words. What I'm about to say, these not my words. You can't blame me. I don't care about you canceling me anyway. I'm already canceled. If you black, you was canceled as soon as you got here, right? Anyway, he said, I can answer for the Africans of the true faith, but I'm not being held responsible for the Christian dogs you own. He told that to his slave master. It's not my words, his words. He was a Muslim, as a slave that had 2 wives, was known to walk around with a red fez, holding his Quran. But the reason why I mention him today is because he wrote from memory the Risala of Ibn Abi Zayd al-Qayrawani. And a lot of it is still preserved today. I'm going to do a shameless plug for my books on the book table. If you look, there's a book there called the Bilali Meditations. You see photographs, there's stories in there, photographs, and, you know, the translation of the remnants of his Risala of Ibn Abi Zayd that he wrote from memory. And so I'm saying that to say, as black people, you know, African Americans, you know, most of our ancestors that were brought here were Muslims. And some would argue, because if you know the history, you know, he was Fulani, or as they say in Gambia, Fulla, or what have you, he was Fulani. And a lot of the slaves that we know for a fact were Muslim and left documentation, we have some information about them. They were all mostly Maliki, but that's not why I mentioned that, because I don't want to anger my Shafi. That's not why I mentioned that.
Don't worry, we're good at comparing methods. Just start, open the door. Right now, it's still.
The reason why I mention that, because it's well known that if you're Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'at, or if you're Maliki or Shafi, it's automatically understood without even specifying that you're Ashari. That you have the creed of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'at. So in the same way that when we talk about black history in America, those people who are conscious or woke, as they say now, we find it offensive when you start our history at picking cotton and being slaves, right? We should also feel offensive or feel offended when you talk about our Islamic history and you talk about Wahhabism or default Wahhabism or some off-break of the Qadiani movement, whether it be in the Nation of Islam or the Moorish Science Temple. The Islam that was brought to this country by our ancestors were from Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'at, and they espoused the creed of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'at, and we have documented proof to illustrate that. So what we're talking about now is not only, you know, academic and all of that. This is part of our legacy. This is part of our history. This is what was taken from us. And when you recognize that it's been taken from you, it's not something that you deal with passively. You recognize you've been robbed. Something's been taken from you. And in order to keep you distracted from what has been taken from you, they keep giving you these other stuff. Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'at was taken from us. Our proper Islamic belief has been taken from us. And they've always been actively and persistently giving us pseudo-Islamic movements. And the Wahhabi movement is no exception to that rule. We have to understand that when you think about the Wahhabis, you need to put them in the same category as the Moorish Science Temple, the Qadiani movement, the Nation of Islam. And talking to me. You know, I'm just a joke. That's a bluff. The 5% movement, all of them, right?
Boy, we starting to fight here. I'm telling you, this whole thing gonna change.
No, I'm saying because we don't really recognize what's been done to us. They not only snatched our bodies from the African continent, they snatched our language, they snatched our deen, and then they given us, you know, weak, fake, you know, substitutions for it. And GMO. Yeah, they're giving us GMO deen. Yeah, you can call it that, right there now, GMO deen. Genetically modified deen. GMD. Genetically modified deen. You eat it, it tastes like something, but it has no nutrients in it. It can actually harm you. And in this situation, it could lead you to hell. Because you think that Allah is on the throne above the heaven with feet and the shin that's on the chair, and he's going up and down in the last third of the night, and all of these things that Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'at clearly are against. All of our books of Aqeedah say, Allahu mawjud bila makan. Allah exists without a place. They put Allah in a place. I mentioned in the class, in our class, that I remember in the house that I grew up in, my parents were Christian, and they used to have a little picture thing with the Lord's Prayer on it, right? And our Father, thou art in heaven, right? That's the Christian belief. They give Allah the attribute of Father, and they put him in heaven. And now we get in Islam, where Allah is a mukallafun lil hawadith, distinct and different from His creation, then we get this GMD, this genetically modified deen, while our God is in heaven on a chair. It's not Islam. And so I just want to mention in conclusion, just thinking about what Imam Fahim said, this is Sheikh Uthman Dan Fodio's book, Umdatul Bayan, and the first section of it is dealing with creed. And as we've all said here today, all these books of Aqeedah, creed, they all begin the same way. وَيَجِبُ عَلَى كُلِّ مُكَلَّفٍ أَنْ يَتَعَلَّمَ مِنْهُ مِقْدَارَ مَا يُصَحِّحُ بِهِ اعْتِقَادَهُ. It is obligatory upon every responsible person, the mukallaf, to know enough of it to make his belief sound. So while a lot of us may not be studious or scholarly, we may not remember all the technical terms and all of that, but our belief has to be sound. It has to be pure from these GMDs, genetically modified deen, or its derivative, genetically modified Aqeedah, GMA. It got to be purified from genetically modified Aqeedah. And so we recognize that we've been attacked. Something was taken from us. Something fake was given to us in its place. And for us, it's the Wahhabi creed for the most part. And so when we're learning our proper belief, we have to make sure that we weed out all of these bad things that are in the creed and replace it with those non-GMO, organic. Organic Aqeedah, right? Well, alhamdulillah. So I just wanted to mention that these things were in my mind, and I just wanted to mention, I just jotted this down when Imam Fahim said it. He already said it, I just wanted to say it again, that when a lot of times they use terms, and you don't know it, but they change the meaning of those terms. Like Imam Fahim mentioned how they say that the Muslims, meaning the non-Wahhabi Muslims, that they're okay in their Tawheed or Rububiyyah. In other words, they're just like the Christians and the idol worshippers. They all say that Allah is their Lord. This is what they say about us. But they changed the meaning of worship. This is why they created the category Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah, oneness of Allah's worship, because they say that we do shirk. We are mushriks in their mind in the area of Allah's worship. Because they take certain practices, even some of those practices that the Prophet Mohammed sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught us, they say, no. You're not calling on Allah through means of that sheikh or that blessed article. No, you are calling on that sheikh. You are praying to him. They redefine it. They tell you what you're doing. And this is one of the ways when they try to slander you. One of the first slanders, how we said before, you fatso, right? The Wahhabi equivalent of that is to call you a Sufi. And then a derivative of that is they call you a grave worshiper. Say you worship graves or you worship the people that's in the grave. How many of y'all remember back when I lived in Philadelphia and we used to teach at the masjid on 52nd Street, the Musella above the PNC? I remember. You remember 52nd Street? You got the vendors out there. When we used to do the Juma cookbars out there, the Wahhabi vendors, they wouldn't do the Juma. They would be right outside selling during Juma, right? I got cursed out in the middle of my cookbar a couple of times there, right? Talking about literally F words in the middle of the cookbar, right? Like literally, F this. I ain't got to listen to this S. Come on, baby, we out of here. Brother came with his wife and said that. He says, we're getting out of here. Y'all remember that masjid, right? It was on second floor, third floor, bathroom and stuff. Let me show you how sick the thinking is. So many times Wahhabis came there because they heard some Sufi grave worshippers were teaching there, and they was coming there looking for the grave. Where was the grave going to be at? In the basement under the PNC Bank? On the roof? In the stairway? What was they looking for? I mean, you had literally people coming up there like me, mugging, like, yo, what's up? See you TV and something. Yeah, I see. Yeah, I see. Like, literally, I seen it with my own eyes. And so, you know, may Allah help our people. But like Imam Amin said, we have to actually get back to not only lecturing, but we have to get back to teaching. And if you've been following our classes, I mean, just even on Master Mohammed's platform by itself, in the last year and a half, 2 years, if you've been there from the beginning, you learn the Aqeedah of Imam Tahawi twice, from Imam Amin and Sheikh Wali. And we can go on and on and on. And so these things have to be repeated and repeated and repeated. But we have to understand it. We have to understand it so that we can explain it in our own words. Not only us and the imams and stuff, but each and every one of you here have to be able to explain it in common, plain English, no technical language, so everybody can understand. So we can reach those people who actually believe that we had a grave on 52nd Street above the PNC Bank that we was worshiping. Right? This is the type of mentality that we're dealing with. So again, may Allah guide us.
You know, that happened to me. There is a famous scholar who lived in the previous century. His name is Sheikh Yusuf Nabhani, rahimahullah ta'ala. He is known in the world as the most severe in love of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he wrote so many books about salah and salam on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, praising the Prophet. It's well known for this, right? And in the last century, no one wrote as much as him. But he's buried in Beirut, Lebanon. So my teachers would always take us to go visit his grave, make dua, you know, for him and the others in the graveyard. This is a habit of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah, visiting the graves. So we had a picture of me making dua at his grave. So someone said, see, he's worshiping graves. And the funny thing, so they said, he's worshiping the dead. You see, look at him, making salah to the graves. First of all, I didn't make salah. Was no ruku, was no sujood. I just made dua. And I said to the person, I said, Tayyib, I said, did any of the Sahaba, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, ever go to the grave of the Prophet after his death? Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And make dua there? There is a famous story, very significant to show you that this is something that was understood and accepted among the companions. To make dua at the graves and the Salaf of the pious people. And the Prophet ﷺ is the most pious of the pious. One time there was a drought in Al-Madinah. No water. This was during the Khilafah of Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu ta'ala, when he was the Khalifa. So people were in dire circumstances. One of the companions, he went to the grave of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he said at that grave, "O Prophet of Allah, seek rain for your nation because they're about to perish." And he fell asleep at the grave of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, this ain't like today in Medina, we got all this stuff. No, the grave is right there. He fell asleep at the grave of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he saw the Prophet in the dream sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the Prophet told him, send my salam to Umar and tell him to be diligent. Work. That companion, he went back to Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, and he told him what happened. This is who? Who did he go to? Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu. What do we know about Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu?
Very strict.
To the point he would do what?
Cut your hair.
And put hands on people. One of the companions was reciting the Quran in a way other than Sayyidina Umar. When Umar grabbed him and took him to the Prophet. He didn't just leave that alone. Come here. Right? SubhanAllah. And that man told Umar, that companion, about this. And Umar said, I forgot. He gathered the people together to make the prayer for rain. Had going to the graves, asking at the grave, been shirk, would Umar would have dealt with that? Would he would have listened to him and then did something? SubhanAllah. Sayyidina Imam Shafi'i radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And there is a hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam who said that the scholar of Quraysh will fill the earth with his knowledge. And they agree that this is Imam Shafi'i. The scholars mentioned that thing. He said, when he was in Baghdad, in Iraq, he said, whenever I would have a need, I would go to the grave of Abu Hanifa and ask Allah for that need. At the grave of Abu Hanifa. All of them, they say we follow the Imams, right? Abu Hanifa, Malik, Shafi, Ahmed. Was Imam Shafi a mushrik? No. He went to the grave, he said, whenever I have a need, I go to the grave of Imam Abu Hanifa and ask Allah there. We could go on and on and on among the great scholars who specifically went to graves to do that, to make dua. And our scholars, in many of their books, mention this issue, right? Here's one of the things that I want you to think about. I'm going to write you some issues. I'm going to give you some issues. I want you to write them down, right? Let's take the first one that they already mentioned, the Trinitarian Tawheed, right? Trinitarian Tawheed, 3 Tawheeds, you know this one? Right? So they said, Tawheed al-Uluhiyya, the Tawheed al-Rububiyyah, Tawheed al-Uluhiyya, Tawheed al-Asma wa Sifat. This is the ugliest bid'ah that they came with. If you're talking about bid'ah, this is an ugly innovation. These are the people who say we don't do bid'ah. Tell me from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam where he divided Tawheed into 3. Tell me from the companions. Tell me from the Tabi'een. Tell me from the Atba'i Tabi'een. None of them, any of the Salaf who divided Tawheed into 3. Not one. You will never, in no book, nowhere, find anyone from the Prophet ﷺ, from the companions, from the followers of the companions, from the followers of the companions, or those after them who wrote in their books or in their narrations 3 divisions of Tawheed. Never. You will not find it. That is one point. If you study all the books prior to Ahmed ibn Taymiyyah, who lived in Damascus in the 8th century, you will not find the scholars of the Hanabila, he was Hanbali, who said that. Not even the early Mujassima among them, those who gave Allah bodily attributes in that, not even them said that. This is fact check, right? You know they say fact check? Go fact check. And you know they always say bring your proof, right? Show one who said that. Right? That's one issue. What is that issue for? Tawheed al-Rububiyyah is the Tawheed of lordship. And everybody, according to them, believes that. Right? Everyone believes that. According to them, this is false. Right? And that's not sufficient. You need to add another Tawheed, which is what? According to them. Tawheed. So that's Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah. So there is one Ilah, that is Allah, right? So you can believe that Allah is the Rabb, but you don't have to believe He's the only Ilah. Stuff is silly. But nevertheless, let's examine it. All of us know we're going to be questioned in the grave, right? That's something that's ma'lum, something well known in the religion, right? What are the questions? من ربك وما دينك ومن هذا الرجل يعني محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. Where's من إلهك? ورسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم. Yeah. من هذا الرجل يعني محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم ورسوله. Now, هذا, check this. Where's the question من إلهك? من ربك. If this was not sufficient, then he would have added من إلهك. If everyone would say من ربك, who's your Lord, then it would necessary to say من إلهك, who's your God. But that's not the question, right? You ever thought about that? That was sufficient. So that means in that question, Man Rabbu is understood. Man Ilahu is Allah. Same thing. And that's why, now take, if you study the previous books of Aqeedah, prior to Ibn Taymiyyah, that's the 8th century, he died 728. Prior to that, you won't find that categorization. You won't find. That's an innovation that he brought. That's a bid'ah that he brought 400 years after the time of the Salaf. So that is, what were they, what was he trying to do, and what did the Wahhabiyya, who followed those ideas, right? What were they trying to establish? Two things. So we got that belief, right? The concept of at-tawassul and tabarruk. At-tawassul, it is asking Allah wa ta'ala by the status of the Prophet ﷺ or the righteous. That's called at-tawassul, right? It is asking Allah by the status of the Prophet ﷺ and by the righteous, right? At-tabarruk is to seek blessings from Allah by the traces of the Prophet ﷺ or the righteous, right? So they say that to do this is shirk. is worshiping other than Allah. Tell you, go prior to them. What are you going to find? At Tawassul, in the Hadith, related by Tirmidhi and others, also, that a blind man came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this Hadith is related by Tirmidhi and others from the route of the companion Uthman ibn Hunayf. It's a companion of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was blind. He came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said, pray for me for the return of my sight. For the return of my sight. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, oh, be patient and get the reward from Allah. He said, I don't have a guide. It's rough on me, not sight. Pray for me. Listen what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam told him. He said, go to the place of wudu, go to the place of ablution. Pray 2 rakah and say this dua, which means, oh Allah, I turn to you by the status of your prophet, the prophet of mercy. Oh Muhammad, Ya Muhammad, I turn to my Lord by way of you for the return of my sight. Listen to this hadith. The Prophet ﷺ told him to say this. I turn to you by the status of your prophet, the prophet of mercy. That's one thing. That's sufficient, right? أتوجه إليك بنبيك نبي الرحمة. It's simple, right? He didn't just stop there. The Prophet said, say, Ya Muhammad. Oh, he called on the Prophet directly. While he wasn't in the presence of the Prophet. So I said, what the Prophet told him to do, go to the place of wudu. He's not in the presence of the Prophet. When you say, Ya Muhammad, that's a call, right? The Prophet told him to do that. I turn to you, to my Lord, by way of you. I turn to my Lord, speak by way of you for the return of my sight. Then he came back to the Prophet ﷺ before the session was ended, and his eyesight was returned. Oh, his eyesight was returned. So he was away, he returned to the majlis of the Prophet ﷺ, and his eyesight was returned. Did the Prophet teach him shirk? Did he order him to call on me when I'm not present? Yes, he said, mention my name, Ya Muhammad. Muhammad is not Allah, right? But he said, Ya Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the Prophet told him that. Okay. What happened so far later, during the time of Uthman ibn Affan, radiallahu ta'ala, when he was the Khalifa? The Prophet has passed. Abu Bakr was the Khalifa, then Umar, then Uthman. So there is time. So we're talking about over 12 years later or more, right? When you go the time now. What happens there? A man has a need, as Imam al-Tabarani mentioned, and this is deep. He mentioned in his Mu'jam al-Kabir. And in this Mu'jam, of all the hadith, only this one, he says that this is a Sahih hadith. He mentions it explicitly, as if he knew someone was going to come later and say this is wrong. He mentioned a man in need, and guess who he narrates is from At-Tabarani. He narrates with his chain of narrations to this companion, Uthman ibn Hunayf, the same companion that narrated the hadith of the blind man. This man, he has a need with the Khalifa. He came to Uthman ibn Hunayf, the companion, who was with the Prophet ﷺ in that session. He said, I have a need with the Khalifa and I can't get to him. Can you please speak to him for me? Look what Uthman ibn Hunayf said. He's a companion. He said, go to the place of wudu, make 2 rakah and say this dua. And he said, oh Allah, I turn to you by the status of your prophet, the prophet of mercy. Oh Muhammad, I turn to Allah by way of you for the fulfillment of my need. He said, then come back to me and we will go see the Khalifa together. That man went and did that. He made the 2 rakah, he made the good wudu, he made the 2 rakah, he made that dua, and he went directly to the house of Uthman ibn Affan, Sayyidina Uthman. He didn't go get that companion. He went and he knocked at the door. The doorman opened and said, come on in. Uthman sat him down. He said, I didn't remember your need till just this moment. After he made that dua. He said, if you have any other need, come to me and I will fulfill it for you. On his way back, he saw the companion Uthman ibn Hunayf. He said, Jazakallahu khairah. May Allah reward you. Thank you for talking to the Khalifa for me. He said, I never talked to the Khalifa. He said, verily, I was with the Prophet ﷺ, and a blind man came and he told the story. Did not Uthman ibn Hunayf know that calling on the Prophet after his death would have been shirk? And he told that man to do it? Did not Sayyidina Uthman know that this person would come? The whole creed of the Wahhabiyya, that's what a tawassul, and we can go on more and more. I'm just giving you 2. These are companions and followers of the companions. From the who? Salaf. They're from the Salaf. They are the Salaf. Not only from the Salaf, they are the best of the Salaf. What did Allah say about the companions? كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس. You are the best. خير الناس قرني. The best people are my people. My generation. That's what they did. That man went to the grave and he said, oh Lord, our prophet seek rain for your nation. He's in the grave. Doesn't he know that the prophet is dead according to them and he can't answer? That's not the Prophet said. He said, Hayati khayru lakum wa mamati khayru lakum. My life is good for you and my death is good for you. That's how the companions understood it. Tabarruk. So they say you're asking by the traces of the righteous, shirk. Who is the best warrior and leader of the Muslim army in this nation among the companions? Khalid ibn Walid. Khalid ibn Walid, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he used to wear a hat, a helmet. And inside the helmet, he had something. During one of the battles, he lost his helmet. He told it, now remember this is a battlefield. Imagine what a battlefield looks like when it's over. In the time of the companions. Got people all over the place. He lost the helmet. He told the companions, find my helmet. Helmet? We need to get the wounded. Find my helmet. They went and they brought it to him. And in the front of it, he had some hairs of the Prophet ﷺ inside.
Allah.
He said, I never fought a battle with this and lost. This is companions. They went and thought, why they didn't say this is shirk? Why are you holding the hair of the Prophet ﷺ in your helmet? And thinking you're going to win a battle by that, by the status and the blessing of that. The Prophet ﷺ, when he performed the pilgrimage, he called for the barber and he clipped his hair and he distributed it among the companions. As our teacher said, why did he do that? For them to eat it? No. They used it to treat the sick. The companions, they did that. They took the blessings by that. Some of the righteous were buried with the hair of the Prophet ﷺ in their shrouds. By seeking blessings from the traces of the Prophet ﷺ. These are the companions. Are they mushrikun? These are the companions of the Prophet ﷺ. And he gave it to them. Why would he give them his hair? Why would he distribute it among them? This is Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah. So that whole Tawheed al-Rububiyyah, Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah is designed to consider the Muslims who have done that for every generation after the Prophet ﷺ up to this day as mushrikun. And you will go nowhere in the Muslim world and not find the Muslims doing this as a continuous practice with an unbroken chain of narration back to the Prophet ﷺ. This is well known, right? One issue, we got that? So that's two issues. So the third issue, Tawheed al-Asma wa Sifat. So that's why they have the first two. Now once they consider all the Muslims mushrikun, now they consider you not Muslim. So when they say this is shirk, you don't know the default meaning of that, right? You're a kafir. So it says, well, all of them are mushrikun. Last time I checked, if someone commits shirk, what are they? Not Muslim. So that was the view of him, and that's why they kill people. That's why they killed the Muslims. They had no problem. They didn't consider them Muslims. They considered them mushrikun. And they were having jihad against the mushrikun who happened to be Muslimun. So they took the ayat, the verses that were revealed to the kuffar, and applied them to the Muslims. They took the verses that were revealed in the Quran that were applied to mushrikun, and they applied them on the Muslims. And Asma wa Sifat, where are they going with this? What they wanted to understand from this is that Allah is attributed with literal physical attributes. And to make figurative interpretation is, which is called a ta'wil, is a ta'til, is denying Allah's attributes. And from that, they call that deviation in the attributes of Allah, and deviation in the attributes of Allah is kufr. Knowing all of the Muslims, past and present, from the Salaf and the latter Muslims, made figurative interpretation. And as Imam Naeem so eloquently pointed out in his last class, or the one before that, that they will tell you that figurative interpretation is denying Allah's attributes. And what that would necessarily entail, that everyone who made figurative interpretation are deniers of Allah's attributes. Who among as-Salaf made figurative interpretation? Abdullah ibn Abbas from the companions. And who was Abdullah ibn Abbas among the companions in terms of interpretation of the Quran? He was the interpreter of the Quran by the dua of the Prophet ﷺ. And he made figurative interpretations. Who else among the Salaf? Mujahid, who was from the Tabi'een, who was the student of Abdullah ibn Abbas, who said every verse of the Quran I studied with Abdullah ibn Abbas. So he knew it, and he made figurative interpretation. Among the great scholars of Hadith from the Salaf, who made a ta'wil, Imam al-Bukhari, in his Sahih of al-Bukhari. Interesting, we should show you the play, because in the other books they can avoid this because we don't have them. They translated Sahih Bukhari in English. When they got to al-Bukhari's figurative interpretation, they didn't translate it. They left it out. You go to the book of Tafsir in Sahih Bukhari, the book of Quranic commentary, that is in the Quran, كُلُّ شَيْءٍ هَالِكٌ إِلَّا وَجْهَهُ. Everything will perish, and they say except his face, because they believe literal. Imam al-Bukhari says, أي إلا مُكَ, except his dominion, not his face. He said wajh means muk, dominion. That's Imam al-Bukhari. But when they translated, they left it out. So you don't know al-Bukhari made ta'wil. And then they sell you a book. This is Sahih al-Bukhari. And then they tell you in the book, it's not permissible to make ta'wil. They tell you in the book, read it, it's not permissible to make interpretation. And then they wipe out where al-Bukhari made interpretation. This is stuff you can look and check. This is stuff you can look and check. Now I want to ask you, with all these things, and I can give you on and on and on, do you think this is a mistake or deliberate? Right? And this is just off my mind quoting, right? If we go book by book by book by book by book, it'll really get bad. Whenever they want to hide something, they alter it. Imam al-Nawawi, he has a chapter in his Al-Afkar. It's the section on visiting the grave of the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's the section Ziyaratu Qabr Rasulillah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They took out Qabr, the chapter visiting the Messenger. They took out the word, changed the word, because they don't want people to visit the grave. Didn't Imam al-Nawawi know? He's a hafiz of Hadith. Doesn't he know what is permissible or not permissible to do? That's Imam al-Nawawi. Yet they would tell you, we follow the scholars. This is what we're facing. And here, you can go on and on and on and on with these evidences. For us, it is important that we jot down these points. Bid'ah. One last one. Bid'ah. They tell you that every innovation is misguidance. And every misguidance is in the hellfire, right? And they use a hadith for that. Every bid'ah is misguidance, every kula bid'atin dalala wa kula dalalatin finnar. Right? If you go check the hadith commentaries by the great Hufaz of hadith, the masters, like Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, like Imam al-Nawawi, like Ibn Abd salam, these great muhaddithin scholars, you're going to find all of them say the opposite of what the Wahhabis understood from them. They are the Hufaz, right? They all said that bid'ah is actually in 5 categories: obligatory, recommended, permissible, disliked, and unlawful. They all mentioned it in their books. None of them understood what they said. You want to look, go to Fathul Bari for Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, Go to Sharh Sahih Muslim of Imam al-Nawawi, you're going to see it. Go Al-Qur'an al-Kubra for Ibn Abdus-Salam, you're going to see it. And many, 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 many of the books. But guess what? You notice they never translate none of those books. They want you to understand Sahih al-Bukhari. They know the most relied upon book in explaining Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim is the book of Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani and the book of Imam al-Nawawi. But what they don't want you to know is that Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, Amir al-Mu'mineen fil Hadith, Al-Hafidh Imam al-Nawawi, that's what they believed. Those things that they say are bid'ah, they actually believed them and wrote them and promoted them in their books. Think about it. Visiting the graves, they mentioned it. Making a tawassul, they mentioned it. Making a tabarruk, they mentioned it. Praiseworthy innovations, they mentioned it. These are our scholars. They understood with unbroken chains to the Prophet ﷺ. Now watch this. We said that those people, we started, what did I start this whole thing I started with a saying. What was it?
Whoever knows this man is out.
The gain of
Say it again. That was him. I said, when I started.
Oh, you saw.
What did I start with? Where did I get that from? No. Which book?
Oh, Muslims.
Sahih Muslim. In which part of his book? The introduction. Who said it? Abdullah Ibn Mubarak. He's from the Salaf. What did he say?
The narration is part of the day, and without anybody can say whatever.
Good. Keep that thought. Those Wahhabiyya give one chain, if they have chains, right, to Sahih al-Bukhari. If they produce a chain to Sahih al-Bukhari, you study their chain. In their chain is going to be Al-Hafidh Ahmad ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, whom they say, if you believe these things or do these things, this is bid'ah, this is shirk, this is kufr. In every chain that they can produce, it goes through him. Wait a minute. Every chain they're going to produce that is trustworthy, that is reliable, is going to go for Sahih Muslim through Imam al-Nawawi. You know why I said chains are important? Chains have what? Living people, real people that existed. When you study those chains, and they exist, majority of the people, once you get past the time of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahab, are all people who practice the things that they said is haram. You heard what I said? Every chain, once you get past the 13th century, 12th, 13th century, for them we're talking about, you no longer have Wahhabi scholars. And all of those scholars believed and practiced everything they said is unlawful to do. They practiced at tawassul, they practiced at tabarruk, they did what they considered as bid'ah, and they didn't believe in those three tawheeds. You want an easy way to know that? Those Wahhabi people, they claim to be what madhab? Hanbalis. Go to the Hanbalis during their time and prior to them in the preceding generations and see what they believed. Their books are available. They didn't believe as those believed. So what you would notice is that this is what obvious, an innovation in and of itself. And not only that, it's a broken chain. And if it's a broken chain, what does that tell you? Anyone can say whatever they want. And Hadith, because they claim to be what? The people of what? Hadith, Ahlul Hadith, right? Al-Athari, right? Ahlul Athar. In Hadith, the most important thing for identification among the conditions that they mention is what? Continuous unbroken chain. And their chain is broken. Broken. Because if you ever start learning Asanid chains and the people of the Asanid, it's very important, and learn about them, you're going to discover this innovation clearly. Right? So, if you look at Imam Naim was talking about the Maliki scholars from Africa. Go study the chains of those African scholars prior to them going to the University of Medina. Prior to that, you will find all of those scholars in Africa prior to the time of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahab had those same beliefs. This is research. You cannot deny it. Go anywhere, even in Saudi Arabia, prior to the time of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahab. Right? Let me share something with you. This is something that we discovered that was really amazing. In Egypt, in the 12th, 13th century at the beginning, so that means he lived during 10 minutes. Wow, I was just warming up, right? He lived during the beginning of the time of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahab's movement spreading, the Wahhabiyya. The greatest scholar of Hadith, probably in the world at that time, definitely in Egypt, was Sheikh Mohammed Murtada al-Zabidi. Write this down. It's very important. Sheikh Mohammed Murtada al-Zabidi, he was known as the Hadith scholar in the world in that time. Very important. I want to show you something. He died in the year 1205 AH. 1205 AH. He mentioned the Sheikh Uthman Danfodio. Let's see, all these fans, especially on YouTube. Right? When did Sheikh Uthman Danfodio die? Don't say. No. Your Maliki crew. Right? When did the Sheikh die? Everybody's quoting Shehu. When did he die? But Rahimahullah Ta'ala, Rahmatin Wasiya. When did he die? What year? Remember I said history, time, and place is very important. Malik is on it, boy. Asa's on it. 1232. 1232. AH. So that is 27 years after the death of Muhammad Murtada al-Zabidi. Between Sheikh Uthman Danfodio, if you see his chain of narration, it's only one person before Muhammad Murtada al-Zabidi he relates from. So he's in Africa, he relates from his Sheikh to Sheikh Al-Hafid Murtada al-Zabidi in Egypt. This is in Africa, chain of narration, right? You see the belief of the Sultan Uthman Danfodio. He mentioned in his book Untitled Chapter. Study the belief of Muhammad Murtada al-Zabidi in Egypt, which can be easily found where? No. In which book? Y'all following us? How many listen to Scattered Thoughts? Y'all gotta be writing this stuff down. These are Jews.
Issa, where you at?
Issa, where you at? The commentary on the Ihya of Ulumuddin of Imam Ghazali, which we're studying in Post-Fajr Reflections. We're studying the Ihya, or the summary of the Ihya. The most famous commentary on the Ihya is Al-Ithab by Murtada Az-Zabidi. The second book in the Ihya is what book? Come on, y'all. No? Yeah, the second book is about Qawaidul Aqeedah, the foundations of belief. So you will see his belief in that section in his explanation of Ihya, which coincides with what the Shaykh mentioned in his book. So you will see that they believe the same thing. And the scholars after that, right? Interesting. In the 12th century, in the mid of the 12th century, the scholar of Hadith in Mecca was who?
Say that again.
The scholar of Hadith in Mecca. He was Hafiz. He was the well-known, most famous scholar in Mecca in the 12th century. Write the name down. Al-Hafiz Abdullah ibn Salim al-Basri. Al-Hafiz Abdullah ibn Salim al-Basri. He died 1134 after Hijrah. In Mecca, he was the scholar of the world. Abdullah ibn Salim al-Basri. 1134. This is very important stuff because they just tell us about Al-Albani, right?
You know what, Issa.
Or Mukhbil. What about these great scholars? Because they make us think that the people of Mecca were always like this, and they were not. Go study. He was Shafi'i Ash'ari. And he was the Sheikh of Mohammed Murtada Az-Zabidi. He was the scholar of Hadith. That means all the chains of narration that went through Mecca went through him. And he was a Sufi. He made a tawassul, a tabarruk. And he has a commentary on Sahih al-Bukhari where he makes ta'wil. He has a huge commentary on Sahih al-Bukhari that is published. I want you to see what we're working with here. When you see the conspiracy that was made against us as Muslims by the British, by way of the Wahhabis, how they butchered our religion, we have an obligation to learn and return things back to the way they were. Right? But this stuff we're not supposed to know. We're supposed to just know fiqh sunnah. That's it. And the three principles of clean. All this stuff is irrelevant to all those names. No, it's not just names. This is our history. Now, if you go all around the world and start connecting, you'll see where all of them believe the same thing. Now, here, another research project, I gotta stop. I'm sorry. Right? Here's the thing I want to do with Africa. One day. Right? And this is work for us. Let's go around the African continent historically and learn about the scholars and their books and their chains of narrations and their connections and what they believed. Then you're going to start to discover, really, this was a big conspiracy. It was a big conspiracy. And when you discover that, now you got to do something about it, right? You can't just sit back. Because guess what? This is what's being spread in Philadelphia, this conspiracy. In the name of Islam. And they were smart because they trained us to teach us. So now we have our heart over the truth. Not him, he didn't know. Because this stuff can be researched. It's not something that you can deny. And you know what it ends up? I'll close. You know what it ends up saying? All the Muslims were kuffar, misguided, mushrikun, until Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahab came. And then Islam was revived. Compare that to the hadith that I mentioned of the Prophet ﷺ, that Allah would never allow my nation to agree on misguidance. Compare that claim, and they actually say that. Salih Fawzan mentioned in his commentary on the Creed of At-Tahawi that all the Hanafis are misguided, all the Malikis, all the Shafi'is, and all the Hanbalis, they don't really follow the Imams. They deviate. You know how many hundreds of thousands of people you just see? Millions. May Allah help us. Barakallahu feekum. We're just beginning, inshallah. Sallallahu alayhi wa Muhammad wa alayhi wa sallam.
Assalamu alaikum. We're going into office a lot again, once again, and inshallah, after that, we might have another session, then we're going to grub people. Inshallah. So that's it.
What time is
Well,
yeah, we done.
Okay, that's it. We're going to pray, we're going to eat. That's so long. Alhamdulillah. I appreciate everybody coming out. Enjoy yourself. Food is, as you see, plenty of food. And get your grub on. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.